Welcome again to Sail to the Sun. You folks are what I call the class of 24 because you're the ones who are now heading north again, pardon me. Hopefully none of you are in the way of Hurricane Helen, which is coming up. I'm over on the East Coast in North Carolina, and tomorrow I'm taking my boat up to a place called Hurricane Boatyard, where I'm going to be putting it on the hard to do a bottom job and then repaint the top sides because it's been a few years since it's seen a coat of paint and it's looking a little scruffy. But by the time I'm done, it will be another beautiful, brilliant red with gold trim. So that's what I'm doing for the next few days is painting my boat. If anybody wants lessons on boat painting, they're welcome to come up here and help, by the way. I've got a brush. I've got some painter's pants for you. Just, let me know. I'm more than happy for the help. Anyhow, tonight, I should say, we're going to talk about tides and currents. We're going to talk about apps. We discussed them briefly in the first meeting. Some of you saw that, some of you didn't. And we're also going to learn about half tide rising and why it's important to know about half tide rising. So, okay, the computer and I are going to fight again as usual. Okay, there we go. Now, the thing is, you want to learn how to make tides work for you. Now, if you're in the Bay of Fundy, it's a whole different story where they got 40-foot tides. But what you don't want to do is have what's happened to this guy on the right-hand side here. So we're going to talk about tides and how to work them in your favor. And we're going to discuss current, and we're going to discuss the concept of half tide rising as well. Because that is the thing that will get you safely down the ICW if nothing else will. Oops, okay. We're also going to learn about GPX tracks and how to use them properly, because a lot of people, in my opinion, are not using them in the most beneficial way. And like all tools, there's a right of tracks. Okay. Now, what GPX tracks are, they're nothing but one person's route electronically mapped on Aquamaps or on another chart plotter. Now, it's possible for you to make your own tracks for your own use, or you can share them with other boaters, as some have. And I've shared tracks that I've done of inlets with a group of with an online group that deals about ICW inlets. The problem with the tracks that people do themselves is that has the track been calibrated to mean low water? So what I'm saying is that, let's say that you go through an area following somebody's track. That person did the track at high water and did not either state that, or his chart plotter was not, his Aquamaps was not calibrated properly to get to low water. And there's a way to do that, which I'm just learning about now from a friend of mine who's somewhat of an expert on it. But let's say it's not been calibrated. He may lead you over an area that's fine at high water, but at low water is not safe. And we're going to discuss how to avoid that happening. But the whole thing about tracks, that it's nothing magical. If you go online, you can find and Google GPX tracks, you'll find it's available for hikers, for bikers, motorcyclists, and what really started me, even Pokemon players who are playing Pokemon and they're trying to follow what are called go routes. I know nothing about the game, so I just know that that's something you can do with it. The picture on the left here with the arrow, that's pointing at a GPX route that has been done, and that is for the area near Swansboro. And as you can see, it's just a track, just a line that you can follow. Now, one of the problems with the GPX tracks is that your GPS is not 100% accurate. A lot of things can degrade GPS positioning. For example, if your satellite signal is blocked due to buildings or bridges in some cases, or trees, someplace where GPS is a problem, for example, is on the Dismal Swamp, which is largely covered with trees. And oftentimes you'll find that your GPS will blank out for a little bit, or will show you in what's obviously the wrong position, because it'll show you on shore. Your GPX tracks won't work if your GPS is indoors, or, well, underground is obviously not something we deal with as boaters. But let's say the signal is reflected off of a building. That can happen in parts of the ICW, for example, Myrtle Beach. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be an issue there. It's just, you have to be aware that your GPS is not something that you should depend on 110%. Now, some of the less common causes that have been brought up: radio interference, a major solar storm, if there's satellite maintenance going on, things like that. So again, like any piece of equipment, you shouldn't be depending on it 100%. Now, in many cases, a device's GPS hardware, such as your chart plotter or your Aquamaps, your laptop, or I should say your tablet, the GPS hardware is fine, but the charting software is faulty. There might be an error in where the aids to navigation is placed, for example, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. Sometimes, and I've seen this happen, the GPX route simply is not aligning properly with the chart. And sometimes the ATON, the aid to navigation, may be actually off station. And all of this is in addition to potential other problems that you can experience. So, whoops, hang on a minute. I didn't want to go there just yet. Okay, hang on a minute. There we go. For example, in the photo that you're looking at right here, my boat, I took this just last week, a little bit to the south there. I think I might have still been in South Carolina. I can't remember. Anyway, that photo, that screenshot shows me at least 100 and some feet away from the green marker number 99. But the fact of the matter is, I was less than 10 feet. I was probably about 6 or 7 feet away from that marker. So as you can see, I would have been, instead of being in 13 feet of water, I would have been in 10 or 11 feet of water. But I was that close to it. And yet that's not what the chart plotter actually shows. Now, the other thing, and it's you can't see it from here, but when you look at the picture of my boat, the representation of my boat on that screenshot, you'll see I'm a little bit to the left of the dotted line that represents the track. Had I actually been on that line, I would have driven right into the aid to navigation because I was that close. So again, the point is, you shouldn't be staring at your screen and depending on these things, because that's the way to get into trouble. Now, this one here is a much more critical situation. I took this one again just last week. Again, I was less than 10 feet from the photo. This one shows me probably, I'm going to guesstimate 20 or 30 feet from the red aid to navigation 10A. Now, again, the chart either needs to be updated. There may be a problem with the chart, or the ATON is actually out of position. And it's virtually impossible to tell which one, of course. The difference in this situation is that the water is very shallow. I'm in 6, 7, 8 feet of water at low tide. Now, there are locations where you could actually be within less than that, or if you have a particularly deep draft boat, 7 feet, at low tide, you could find yourself going aground in an area like this. Making a mistake in an area like this at low tide, and you're going to be aground. You make a mistake like this on a falling tide, and you could be in big trouble. You could have your boat stuck on a high spot and not be able to get off for anywhere from 3 or 4 hours to possibly the next day. That happened to me in Cuba one time when I went aground on a shoal spot. I went aground on a shoal spot at high tide, and my boat was angled over 35, 40 degrees and stayed like that for the best part of 24 hours until we finally had a higher high tide the next day, and I was able to get the boat off. The problem being that in Cuba, you don't have Boat US, obviously, and there was no boat available that could drag me off the shoal. So I basically had to get an anchor out there and then kedge myself off like the old timers used to do back in the 70s. Can we put it that way? Anyhow, whoops. Okay, there we are. Now, this is an example, and this again was done just last week. This screenshot was taken. Here's an example where the chart has not been updated by the system, but the GPX route has been updated. So the GPX route, as you can see, it comes, if you're following it from the bottom up, it comes up past 62, it comes up past green 63, and then it veers over to the left and then back off to the right. This is Browns Inlet, if I remember right. So what's happened is this is a new chart reflecting a change in the chart, but the chart's not changed. However, this kind of a mistake, if you go through at low tide, could put you aground, okay? And again, the point I'm trying to make is do not trust the electronic equipment that you have 100%. Here's another example. My track here, which is the light green one off to the left, okay? That track was actually inside of the red day mark. And the track, the actual GPX track that is shown by your Aquamaps is potentially unsafe if the shoaling has continued to fill in the channel. In other words, the United States Army Corps the United States Army Corps has updated the what's the word I'm looking for, has updated the hydrographic chart, but the program has not brought in the new updates, and that does happen. It could be a few days, it could be a couple of weeks behind before the updates happen. The problem, of course, is that that track that is shown by the computer could be essentially unsafe if shoaling has continued to fill in the channel. I had quite a long discussion with somebody who promotes these tracks quite vigorously about this entire situation, because an area that I went through 2 days before we had the discussion, Lockwood's Folly, I went through on what I know to be the safe track and what has been the safe track for 20 years that I've been going through there. And this is the track that was told to me by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And what they say is go through anywhere from 30 to 50 feet off the red markers. Don't deviate from that, and you will always have deep water. So I did exactly that. Well, according to the other person, I shouldn't have done that because I should have ended up in 4.5 to 5 feet of water, according to what he said. Demanding of me, he's saying, "Who are you going to trust?" He says, "You whoop." Yeah. He says, "Who are you going to trust?" He says, "You're going to trust the U.S. chart, or are you going to trust what you saw?" Well, that's kind of a stupid question. I saw what I saw. I'm a trained observer. This is what I do. And I saw 7 to 8 feet of water where I was. So again, this is all wonderful technology, but it's technology and it can be a problem. So the question is, how do you know what to do when there's this degree of uncertainty about GPX tracks, about charts, and about what they're actually showing? Okay, here's how not to use your GPX track. They're an aid to assist you in navigation. That's all they are. They're an aid. What you should not do is you should not be staring at the track on your plotter. You should not be staring at your plotter. And there are people who do this. I've read about it. I've seen them. They're staring at they're not looking outside of the boat. They're staring at the plotter, and they're doing their level best to keep their boat exactly on that line. Or the other thing that happens, the person has an autopilot, and they have slaved their autopilot to the GPX track. So what happens is they're exactly on the track. Now, I've heard of this happening, although I've not heard of any collisions yet, but I've heard of people coming down the ICW and following this track, and there's another boat that's basically following the track, and they have an argument between them about who's going to move because they don't want to get off the track, because they don't understand that track is just a representation. And you're looking at a screen that's what, 6, 7, 8 inches wide, maybe a little bit more. That little blue line there represents a distance of probably 30 to 50 feet. So you've got lots of room to move in on that. And plus, the person who did the track, who laid down that track, may have been off the very deepest section. You don't know that. You can't know that. The point is, again, you should not be just staring at the chart plotter and the track. What you need to do is look outside your boat and look at your depth sounder. Okay, that's the important information. And the other thing is, even though there are tracks available that run all the way from Norfolk, Virginia, all the way down to in fact, all the way down to Key West for that matter, you don't need to be staring at that thing the whole way. There are less than 20 places on the entire ICW that are shallow enough that they present a problem where this sort of technology can be helpful. The rest of the time, you could wander 50, 75 feet in one direction, 50, 75 feet in the other direction, and you're still going to be in water over 10 or 12 feet deep. Instead, here's how to use these tracks. In fact, here's how to use any chart plotter, not just GPX tracks. Use them as an aid and glance at your screen from time to time. Immediately look back outside the boat. So in other words, I would look at this chart, this little chart that I'm looking at right here, and I would see 10A, and I would say, obviously, according to this, I should pass fairly close to the red marker. And then I would look up and I would see that red marker ahead of me. A quarter mile, several hundred yards, whatever the case may be away. And I would choose a point to head towards that. And I would be looking at my depth sounder. And if my depth sounder is saying I draw 5 feet, if my depth sounder is saying 6 feet or 8 feet or 12 feet, I'm a happy camper. But check your depth sounder frequently in the challenging areas. And what will happen, and you'll see this as you travel south. When you're in shoal waters and you're trying to find your way out to deeper water, let's say in this case that the water is deeper to your starboard side. when you turn in that direction, your chart plotter will be reading some, let's say it's saying, whoops, let's say it's saying something like 7 feet. And then as you move over, it goes 1, 7, 7, 1, 7, 2, 6, 9, 7, 1, 7, 2, 7, 3, and it bounces back and forth, but the trend is upwards. And that's what you're looking for, is the trend. So if you see it trending upwards, you're obviously heading in the right direction. Now, if it's doing the other thing, if you're in 7 feet, you turn and it goes 6, 9, 7, 6, 9, 7, 1, 6, 9, 6, 8, 7. If it does that sort of thing, clearly you're probably going in the wrong direction. Okay, there are other things that could be happening there too, but basically you're looking for a trend that is putting your boat in the right direction into deeper water as opposed to shallow. So again, your depth sounder is the instrument you want to be watching more than anything else. Now, the other thing that happens to people, and it's happened to me as well, you're going through an inlet and the water is pushing in from the ocean, for example, or it's pulling out from the ocean, depending on whether you've got an ebb or a flood tide. And as you're going through that inlet, that water is pulling or pushing on your boat and moving your boat laterally. So you're going forward, but you're also moving laterally to the left or the right. What we do instinctively, we don't know we're doing it. You're looking ahead, you're aiming at a point ahead of you, but as the boat is being pushed or pulled, you're turning the boat unconsciously to keep it aimed at that spot, even though you're being moved out of the channel. What you need to do is look behind your boat and make sure that you have not been moved out of the channel, that you're not aimed in the wrong direction. And it happens to all of us. I do it regularly coming through an inlet. When I come through, I guess it was Charlotte's Inlet in North Carolina the other day, I looked, it was a really, really strong current because of the no-name storm we had here and all the rain. And I looked behind myself and I saw I was actually being moved out of the channel. I was actually almost all the way over to the greens, and what I needed to do was get back to the center. So I turned my boat and I aimed to the left of the red markers, which then started bringing me back to the center. Now, the point I wanted to make, and I mentioned it a bit earlier, there are very few really difficult areas. There's actually fewer than 20 of them on the entire ICW. And we are going to go through them briefly so that you have an idea what they are. The point I want to make is your eyes and your brain are the most important navigational instruments that you have. So learn to trust them. Do not trust your technology. The technology is an aid, and that's all it is. And the technology, as I was explaining, can be wrong. Okay. Gotta love technology. Okay. So where are the problem areas? Going from north to south. In North Carolina, you've got Browns Inlet. You have New River Inlet, which has changed again. It's back to what it was a couple of years ago. You have an area called Middle Sound. I've got the mileages here. I'm going to just briefly go through these. So if anybody wants to take a screenshot. Pardon? Okay, that wasn't a question. If anybody wants to take a screenshot, you can do that. But remember, this is being recorded and it will be online, and you can then go online and find it and get this information. Wrightsville Beach at 283.5, there's a shoal area that you might want to follow a track on. Also going into, I didn't take a screenshot of this one, but if you go into Wrightsville Beach and you follow the channel up to the anchorage, right south of the bridge, the hydrographic shows that the deep water is to your port side, close to the marina there. But the fact of the matter is the deep water is actually to the starboard side. You have to go almost all the way over to the green and then hug the green as you go around, and that will keep you in 9 or 10 feet of water. So this is a place where the hydrographic charts are actually wrong. And I suspect the reason for that is that particular section has just not been updated. And again, this is why you can't always trust the technology. When you get down to Carolina Beach Inlet, a little further south of there, at mile marker 293.2, again, you're going to see some shoaling area. And that's a really big current there. Again, you want to make sure you check behind yourself. Lockwood's Folly, which I mentioned, Charlotte's Inlet, which I mentioned. From South Carolina to, everybody says, and I get a laugh out of this, everybody says, George is the worst. George is really difficult. The fact of the matter is, North Carolina is really the difficult one. South Carolina to Florida has got a great number fewer of difficult spots. Now, mind you, the ones that they have in South Carolina, for example, McClellanville, when you're going south, it starts at mile marker 430.2, but it goes on for probably, let's say 2.5, 3 miles where it's quite shallow. And at low tide, a boat with 5 feet might make it through, but you'll be pushing a lot of mud out of the way to do it. Isle of Palms at mile 460. is shallow enough that at low tide, boats with 5-foot draft either have to wait or they have to take the little cutoff route that has been developed around that area. Watts Cut a little further south, 40 miles south. It's not bad. It's been dredged. It's 5 foot, 5.5, probably 6 feet will go through it at low tide. But again, you're going to watch yourself there. Ashpoo-Coosaw Cutoff has been dredged. It's much better, but there's still a bit of a problem area in there. Ramshorn Creek, Hellgate has been dredged. It goes down to about, I want to say 7.5 to 8 feet at low tide. The thing about Hellgate is the current. Instead of the current being behind you or in front of you, as it is on a lot of these passages, it's coming right at your side. So it can actually push you out of the channel as you're going through there. The one that's always been a problem and continues to be a problem there is Little Mud River at mile marker 653. Now, the key to Little Mud River is it shoals to under 5 feet at low tide, but there is enough tide coming in that 1 hour after low tide, a boat of 5-foot draft can go through Little Mud River without a problem. At 2 hours after low tide, you can carry 7 feet. Anytime after 2 hours after 2 hours after low tide, any reasonable sailboat can get through there without a problem. Jekyll Creek is now shoaling to about, I want to say 6.5, 7 feet at low tide. And then Matanzas River has been dredged and it's pretty good, but I include it there because people are going to ask about it anyway. Now, one of the tools that we've recently had access to are the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers hydrographic charts. Now, if you use Aquamaps on an iPad or on your phone, you can get these downloaded automatically. Now, this screenshot comparison is of Cumberland Sound, and if you look on the left where the hydrographics are shown, you can see the route that you would intelligently follow, and it carries off a bit to the left side of the screen and then comes back to the right, where it goes down to about 8 feet. But it's very obvious where you should be, and it's very obvious, of course, where you should not be. Now, if you look at the right-hand side where there are no hydrographics, identical chart, and as you can see, the line shown, it comes straight through. There's no deviation for any shoaling there. Now, that line will get you through. That's not the issue. The point is that the other one gives you more information. You can make more intelligent decisions out of it. Okay, so as I mentioned, the hydrographic charts are created by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they're incredibly detailed. This is, yes, this is just south of the Isle of Palms on your way to Charleston, between Isle of Palms and Charleston. And basically this section here, I don't know if my cursor shows, but this section we see all the orange and red and green, that is impassable for most sailboats at low tide. So you either arrange your timing to hit it at other than low tide, or alternatively, you take the alternative route, which brings you to the left, down towards the bottom of the screen, and then around and back up again. The thing about hydrographic charts is they need to be regularly updated. Now, the Aquamaps program, you can set it so that it will automatically update your hydrographic charts, and you'll always be getting the new ones. And that can be automatically turned on in Aquamaps. But the nice thing about this is it shows you where that deepest water is. So you don't need tracks, okay? And something to remember about the tracks is you don't know who laid that track down. And it was not necessarily the person who runs that Facebook site, okay? That individual's boat, from what I understand, has been in Titusville and hasn't gone north of there for the last couple of years. So any knowledge that he has is as secondhand as what the knowledge is that I'm giving you now, because you're getting it from me. The point is, if you have the hydrographic charts, your boat will be shown on that chart, on your chart plotter, and you'll be able to follow that chart and work your way through those spots. Now, after all of this, you're saying to yourself, there's got to be a better way. And there is. Okay, now what I want you to do is to repeat after me. This is the magic. This is the better way. Okay, are we ready? Half tide rising. Okay, let's try it again. All together now. Half tide rising. I can't hear you. One more time. Half tide rising. That is the key. If you have nothing but paper charts and a binocular, which is the way I did the ICW the first few times 20 years ago, if you do half tide rising, you have got no problems. Now, something about the tide, and this is what people don't know. A lot of people don't know this. as the tide goes up, it's on a 6 hour cycle on the East Coast. Okay, it goes from low tide to high tide in 6 hours. Here's what happens: the first hour, you get 1/12 of the tide back, the tidal range. So let's say, for example, you have a 6 foot tide where you are. In that first hour, you're going to get 6 inches of tide back. In the second hour, you're going to get a foot back. So now you're 1.5 feet up. In the third hour, you're going to get a 1.5 feet back. In the fourth hour, you're going to get another 1.5 feet back. In the fifth hour, you're going to get a foot. And in the sixth hour of the tide, you're going to get that last 6 inches back, so that you've got the full 6 feet of tide. Or if it's a 12-foot tide, not that we see many of those on the East Coast, it's going to be 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, then 3 foot, 2 foot, 1 foot. So if you remember that, you can generally figure out, if you know the time of low tide, you can generally figure out how much extra water you've got by multiplying 1/12, 2/12, whatever it adds up to be, times the tidal range. Now, the key to half tide rising and making it work is you have to plan your route so that you reach the shoaling locations, whether it's Jekyll Creek, Little Mud River, what have you, so that you reach at a location that is half tide and rising, or perhaps 1/4 tide and rising, depending on where it is. Sometimes that means that you're going to run a shorter day the day before, or possibly a very long day, because what you want to do is position yourself someplace where when you leave the next morning, you're going to be able to transit the problem area the next day at a time when the tide is high enough and rising for your boat to get through. Now, to give you an idea of what this means, 11 years ago now, no, 10 years ago, pardon me, 10 years ago, I was going to Little Mud River, and I was leading the Sail to the Sun rally, and I had, I think, 14 boats, and one of them drafted 7 feet, another one was 6.5 feet, and the rest of us were anywhere from 4.5 feet to 6 feet. We got to Little Mud River 1 hour after the tide had gone low. So I know from my own experience and from my understanding of how the tides work, that a boat with 5-foot draft could go through there. But when we got there with myself and my 14 rally boats, there was about another, God, must have been another 12, 15 boats at least that were there, maybe more. And they're all milling around, and they're obviously not knowing where they're going or what they're doing. So I got on the VHF and I said, Pan, I said, everybody, this is the red sailboat at the north entrance to Little Mud River. I have this charted out, and if you want to follow us through, I said, I can show you a safe route through. I said, here's how it works. If you have a draft that is over 6 feet, go to the end of the line and wait for another half hour to 3/4 of an hour, and then follow us through. In other words, what I knew was that in another half to 3/4 of an hour, and with that many boats going through, it's going to take that long. There's going to be enough water in Little Mud River to carry a boat with 6 feet to 7 feet draft. So I went to the front of the line, and I've got a bright red boat, so of course, it was pretty obvious who I was. And I started going through it. I remember thinking to myself, and this is before Bob's Tracks, this is before GPS, this is before hydrographics were available, this was before any of this stuff was there. But I'd done the studying, I'd looked at the charts, I figured it out, and I knew where I should be, and I basically marked a route out on my chart plotter to make sure, and it was what I knew to be the safe route. But let me tell you, as I went through, I thought to myself, if I put this boat aground in front of these other 25 or 30 boats, I'm going to have to buy an RV and disappear from the boating world, because I will never, ever live this down. And I sweated my way through that. And I'll tell you, when the depths dropped to about 5.5 feet or so, I was sitting there thinking, oh, please don't let this happen. Please don't let this happen. Well, the good news is I did it right. We got through, everybody got through without a problem, and we all carried on our merry way. But the key to it, as I said, was understanding the entire concept of half tide rising. Now, the other thing you can do, of course, you can consider going offshore to avoid the problem areas. The chart that I've got up here shows where you would go offshore from just south of Beaufort, at Port Royal Sound, and it shows the mileages that you can do. This does not include the mileages that it takes to get you from your anchorage out to the sea buoy, and from the sea buoy back into your next anchorage. So, for example, offshore from Port Royal Sound to St. Simons, you would do 53 miles. St. Simons to St. Catharines Sound, 35. Now, entrances like St. Catharines Sound, for example, you have to be fairly careful. It can be a tricky entrance. Same with Sapelo Sound, which is to the north of this chart. But the nice thing is there's a group online now, a Facebook group called Inlets of the ICW. It's run by a friend of mine whose nickname is Ed Starbird, and he is getting GPX chart routes for all of these different entrances. I've contributed a couple of them myself when I've gone into entrances that they didn't have any for. So if you're planning on doing any offshore, that's a really, really good resource to be aware of, is the Inlets of the ICW on Facebook. So this is one way you can avoid all of the excitement if you want. The problem is, of course, you're going to miss some really gorgeous spots. And the other thing, as I said, Georgia, everybody talks about how difficult Georgia is. Georgia is a lot easier than North Carolina, for example, definitely easier than South Carolina. And the reason I say that is Georgia is very, although it's windy, it's very, very windy. You're going north as much as you're going east and south sometimes, or west and south sometimes. But it's deep. I mean, you'll see 25, you'll see 30, you'll see 40-foot depths going through Georgia sometimes. And it's wide. The ICW in that area, it drops off very, very rapidly and it stays quite wide. The key to that, of course, is as you're coming through, make sure that you stay to the center. Don't cut the corners, because that's where you'll find yourself in trouble if you ever do. Okay, now, the other question is, how do you tell current strength and the direction of the current? So if necessary, you can take advantage of the current. Aquamaps and most chart plotters will have tide and current predictions. So for example, in Aquamaps, you'll see a little thing, it looks like it looks almost like a little outhouse with a number on it. Oh, excuse me. What that is a current prediction chart. So if you click on that, what happens is it opens up to give you a window like this one. Now, on the left is the Aquamaps chart, and I've got the arrows pointed to these different little prediction markers. You click on any one of those, and it opens a window like you see on the right-hand side. And what that window shows you is the current and the current speed. So when this picture was taken, when this screenshot was taken, at 3:57 p.m. of whatever day that was, just outside of Hilton Head Island, the speed of the current was 1.48 knots. The current direction was 146 degrees, and the ebb was decreasing. Okay, in other words, it was slowing down. So, sorry, increasing, not decreasing. I got to get my contact lenses changed. So the ebb was decreasing, and what would happen is that at 5:15, if you look a little further down on the charts, at 5:15, the maximum ebb would be 2.17 knots, and again, it would be at 146 degrees. So in other words, the current is heading southeast, and it's moving fairly rapidly. So for example, if you're leaving Hilton Head and you want to go offshore from Calabogue Sound, which is where this is, you could use that current to pull you out very, very rapidly, and save yourself a lot of time that way. Now, Aquamaps and most chart plotters will have tide and current predictions like this. Now, if you don't have that sort of thing, and even if you do, you should have a tide and a current app. I happen to use what's called Tide Times Pro, and it has lots of good information. I find it very, very useful. It's missing a couple of things I wish it had, but it does most of what I need to do. And the best part about it, of course, it's free. So for example, on Tide Times Pro, you're going to get the times of the high and the low. Like when you click on it, okay, when you open up and you click on it, it will open up a window and it will give you a list of locations. Okay, for example, so you click on the one that's closest to you if that's the one you're interested in. And then it will give you the times of the high and the low tide. If you're not interested in that one, as you can see the nearest locations there, you can click on another one. Let's say that you know that you're okay where you are, but you want to see what the tide is going to be 10 or 15 miles down the road, down the ICW. You can click on the cursor. You can click on the cursor for that one and open up that particular location and see when low tide for there is going to be, for example. And that's important because let's say that you want to do Little Mud River. Well, you're going to want to hit on the tide chart for either Egg Islands or Wolf Island. So you click on that tide chart, looking at this thing, and it tells you that low tide is at 9:35 a.m. Well, clearly, you don't want to go through Little Mud River until 10:35. So what you would do is you would, if you're coming south, you might anchor up at Creighton, just off the Creighton Narrows in the little river there, nice anchorage there, and have yourself a nice leisurely breakfast. Head out of there about 9:15, 9:30. Take your time, run your way up to Little Mud River. You get there about 10:30, 10:35. and then you can safely make your way through. Or if you draw 6 feet, you don't want to get there till 11:30, for example. So that's how we'd use that, the tide charts that way. Now, in addition to that, the My Tide Times Pro also has got the currents for many, not all locations, but for many locations. The only negative on that one is that it does not show the direction of the current. But typically, as you can see here, it shows the ebb, it shows the slack, and it shows when the flow is. Typically, in most cases, you can suss out the direction of the current just by looking at your chart. And if there's a few locations where it's tricky, for example, around Charleston, it can be really tricky. But if you take the time, you can figure it out. So that's the drawback on Tide Times Pro, but it's the one I've been using for years, and I find it works quite good. You may find one that you like better, no problem. The point is, you want an app like this on your phone to help you get your way through. Now, the question that I get all the time whenever I present, does current make a difference? Should I wait, till 11:30 in the morning before I start out so I can get the current behind me? And the fact of the matter is, it depends, and sometimes it does matter, but typically your current is irrelevant to your day's travel. And the reason for that, and it's strictly a matter of arithmetic, waiting 3 hours for the current to shift so that you can gain a knot and a half speed for 4 hours means you're gaining 6 and you're losing 15 nautical miles. It's totally pointless. Just go and struggle with the current as you're moving through. Now, there are some locations where it does make a difference. Winyah Bay outside of Georgetown, when you can, you want to get that current behind you because it's a really powerful current coming through there, especially if you've got a king tide like we've been having recently. You want to get that current behind you, which means leaving Georgetown if you're heading south about an hour after high tide in that location. If you're going through Elliott Cut in Charleston, Elliott Cut is about a quarter mile, but it's a ferocious current through there. So again, if you have a low power boat, you want to try and get through Elliott Cut either at slack tide or with the current behind you. I've gone through there. I have a 20 horsepower Yanmar, and I've gone through there when my speed was cut down to 1.7 knots to do that entire stretch. But I've also gone through there when my speed was 8.5, 9 knots because the current was behind me. Another location with the same problem is Snow's Cut, which is just south of Carolina Beach Inlet. The Cape Fear River is one. The thing about Cape Fear River is you want to get the Cape Fear River current behind you. Now, most likely you're coming from either Wrightsville Beach or Carolina Beach. And if you're going to Southport, which is probably your destination, that's a short trip. So you could leave as late as 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon and still comfortably make Southport long before dark. Okay, it's only from Carolina Beach, I want to say it's 18 miles. So the point is, if you don't get that tide on the Cape Fear River behind you until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, don't sweat it. Time it so you catch that current behind you, and away you go, and you'll be good. Another location, Port Royal Sound, south of Beaufort. It's very long distance, a very strong current. You're likely going to Hilton Head or anchoring somewhere like in Bull Creek outside of Dafowski Island. Again, that's a current that if you can, you want to get behind you. Most of the time, as I said, it makes more sense to just go and not worry about the current, but there are locations where it matters. Now, the other thing too, let's say that there's someplace you want to visit or you have some last minute shopping to do. Maybe it's worth doing those things and getting the current behind you and cutting your day a little bit short. Again, it's going to differ for every situation, but you want to be aware that typically trying to time the current is not a useful way of running the ICW. Now, weather apps, everybody has, excuse me, everybody has their favorite weather app. This is one I've been using for years. It's some TV station. I have no idea where it's from. The reason I use it is it gives me the basic information I need in a nice, simple format. So today, for example, I've got the weather. It's been partly cloudy, minimal chance of rain. I've got the temperature. I've got what the winds are going to be. I'm a happy camper with that information. But what you do want to get is you want to get an app with a radar. Okay, and the reason you want radar, if you look in the right-hand photo, is if there's a cell, a thunderstorm cell around or a rain cell around, you can see it. Now, even though we're on sailboats and even when you're on the ICW, if there's a storm like this coming through, sometimes you can time it either by slowing your boat up or speeding your boat up. so that that storm cell will go ahead of you or behind you, and you can avoid some weather that way. If you've got a trawler or a power boat, obviously it's going to be a lot easier because you've got access to a lot more power. But having the radar is a really handy function on these apps. Now, if you're willing to pay for it, not all of your apps are free, of course. The NOAA Storm Radar app isn't free. They have a free version, but it's very limited. But it has lots and lots of good info. And as you can see, that's basically the same view as the one I just showed you from the weather app I use. And you can see the storm down there just off the point. But this particular app has got all kinds of additional information that's really, really useful. And I forget what the price of it is per year, but it's quite a useful app. Now, my favorite all-round passage planning app is Windy at www.windy.com. I've been using it for years. I really, really like it. Some people prefer Predict Wind. Again, that's another good app. And all of these apps have been really competing with each other, upgrading what they've got available. Some of the things I like about Windy, the basic app, which has tons of information, is free. Have you gotten this idea that I really like free stuff? So there's also a paid version that gives you access to even more information. And plus, the free app usually restricts you to 4 or 5 or 6 days. I forget what it is, 4, 5, 6 days out. And then all of a sudden the app doesn't give you as good information. But the app is free, and I find it works perfectly fine for what I want to do. So let me show you what this app looks like. Okay, now let's start working here, app. There we go. Okay, now you can see it. You can see the weather moving through. This is the most recent one. You can see the weather moving through, but what you can also do, you can click and you get a little flag that shows you what the winds and the direction of the winds actually are. Now, if you click on that little arrow, that little orange arrow on the right-hand side, and I didn't do that here, but it'll open up a screen at the bottom that gives you all kinds of comparisons and all kinds of weather. It'll give you waves. Notice on the right-hand side of this chart, all the 8 data that's available. You've got weather radar, you've got satellite radar, you've got wind, you've got rain and thunder. It shows you the temperature. It even shows you if there's snow, not that we're going to have to worry about snow, obviously. It also gives you waves. It gives you 3 different kinds of waves, swell 1, swell 2, dominant waves. Very, very, very handy information for any kind of offshore planning, especially. Now, the other thing that it does that I really like, it gives you more than one weather model. Now, all that a weather model is, okay, a weather model is a computer program designed with algorithms that weather geeks have said, okay, if you plug this information into the algorithm, it'll give you this output. It'll tell you what the weather is, okay? And that's about as best as I can explain it because I'm not a weather geek and I am not a computer scientist. So different weather models use different algorithms and they give you different outputs. Now, if you look at this screen, you're going to notice that even though they were taken on the same day at the same time, they're showing 3 different outcomes. For example, the upper left-hand one shows some heavy weather that's on the north, not the north, on the basically the northeast side of Florida, northwest side of Florida, excuse me. And then it shows a little bit of weather on the central east side of Florida. And I'm talking about in relation to that flag that you see there. You look at the bottom one and it shows some fairly heavy weather approaching South Florida and the Keys, but it shows fairly benign weather with a northerly wind of 12 knots on the East Coast. And then on the far right-hand side, it shows absolutely no weather. It shows a band of very light winds between 2 different weather systems between Miami and West End of the Bahamas. Okay, which one of those was right? I don't remember now. But the point is, when you look at more than one weather model and the results are drastically different between the 3 weather models, what that is telling you is that there's no agreement between the weather models. That's obvious. If there's no agreement between the weather models, you want to stay put because it means that the weather, the format is unsettled, the weather's unsettled. What you are looking to do is you want to move when the weather models agree, especially if you're doing something like crossing over to the Bahamas. Okay, very, very important. Check your different weather models. When they all agree and it's a weather forecast that you're happy with, i.e. the winds are not out of the north, the winds are not too strong, etc., that's when you move. And when they all agree, it's pretty rare that it goes sideways. It's not that it's never happened, but it's pretty rare. And we're going to discuss that more when we talk about Bahamas next week. Okay, So questions or comments, folks? Do you have any questions about this? You can raise your hand, or you can hit the chat line, or you can just speak up. Just unmute your mic and speak up.
Hey, Wally, this is Kevin.
Hi,
You
Kevin.
mentioned, hey, how are you? You mentioned underpowered boats and current. What do you think an underpowered boat is? Obviously, old sailboats might not be as powerful as power boats, but what are you talking about?
Okay, my boat is 34 feet and 11,000 pounds. It was originally designed with a 27 horsepower Volvo engine. When I bought the boat, the engine needed to be replaced, and I replaced it with a 20 horsepower engine. So I'm underpowered. And there are different formulas. Some people say you should have 1 horsepower per foot of length of the boat. So technically, under that scenario, I should have a 35 horsepower engine. That would probably be overpowered. And when I repower this boat, I will move up to a 30 horsepower Yanmar engine, or 30 horsepower Beta, something like that. So it it's the a boat is underpowered in relation to its weight, and
Mhm.
it's being, for a trawler, for example. A trawler's got a very broad bow, um, and what might be underpowered on a trawler would be lots of power on a sailboat. So, for example, if I had like a 25 foot, a 28 foot, one of those small, um forget the brand name, one of those small trawlers. If I had a 28 horsepower motor in one of those small trawlers, that might be well underpowered, even though it would be lots of power for a narrower sailboat. Do you follow what I'm saying, Kevin?
I do, yeah.
Now,
I
if
mean, I guess
it's
my real question is,
well,
how am I doing? And maybe we just need to get out there and figure it out as we're on the ICW.
I'm sorry, say again, please.
I guess my question is really, how are we doing, given the various inputs that you just described? And maybe we can't know until we're out there and facing some current.
What type of boat do you have, and what sort of engine?
We've got a Pearson 35, and
Yeah,
she's got a brand new Beta 25 on her.
you should be fine. Um, the beta, and see, the other thing, of course, too, is now you have a Beta 25. It's brand new, so I'm going to assume that the prop was properly matched to the engine in the boat.
Yeah, I've got a feathering prop.
Okay, so if the feathering prop is obviously adjustable. Um,
Yeah.
you may find, um, what you may find is, as you're moving along, that you're not getting enough revs from the engine. We're getting a little technical here, and you and I can discuss this at a later date in more detail. But for everybody else, a feathering prop is typically adjustable, so you can adjust it so that you're getting the proper revs from the engine. Your engine should be able to rev to its max speed, which on that Beta is what, 3,600, if I
It's
remember
high.
correctly.
Yeah, it's like 36 or 38. Yeah, it's way up there.
Okay, so 36, 38. So you should be able to get hull speed. I'm guessing, I don't know the stats for the engine. You should probably be able to get hull speed at about 34, 35, and have a couple of hundred RPM left over. Now, let's say that you get to your 3,600 maximum RPM, and you're not getting hull speed, which on that boat would be
6.7.
6.7. So let's say you're getting to your maximum RPM, and you're not getting hull speed. What that's telling me is that A, you have a dirty bottom or a dirty prop, or B, you have to adjust the prop to the pitch on the prop to give it more push.
Cool.
Okay. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. I actually have to do that on my boat. I swapped engines a year ago, um, for from a 2QM20 to a 3GM, which is also a 20 horsepower engine. But what happened was the transmission ratio changed from 261 to 2.14 or something like that. And ladies, for the ladies who are not technical, or for the guys who are not technical for that matter, what it means is that the engine is not able to transmit as much power, as much torque to the propeller as what it did. So what's happening is that I'm losing some thrust from the engine to the propeller. So I need to change my propeller, but I know that, and I'm not letting that bother me for the moment. I'm aware of it. So for example, I should be able to do 6.7, 6.8 at max rev, because my prop is improperly pitched. It's an issue. But so it's to answer your question short, how do you know if you're underpowered? There's a lot of factors that go into it, but you should be able to get hull speed at a few hundred RPM short of your maximum revs on your boat. If you can't, then there may be an issue there.
Good.
And once it gets to that point, you kind of need technical help to figure out what the problem is.
Good enough. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No, No problem. That was a little bit longer than I meant to go because it's a complex topic and it's not one that I'm real comfortable with. There's a little bit of mystery to that one. And a lot of boaters will tell you, like, there are formulas for figuring out pitch props and things like that. And you go on and you can do these formulas and buy the prop, and it'll be absolutely the wrong prop. And yet you can go to some guy who's been in the industry for 40 years and he's grizzled and he's walking with a cane. He'll look at your boat, you tell him what his engine is, and he says, you need a 14-inch prop with a 7-inch pitch, and son of a gun if he doesn't have it right every time. So it's just a skill. Okay, any other questions, folks? Hello? Questions? Okay, sounds like there's no more questions. As always, I have recorded this and it will be online. I will be giving the URL for the recording on Sailing and Cruising a bit later on tonight or tomorrow morning, depending on how hard I want to work or whether I want to get to sleep tonight. And next week we will be discussing crossing the Gulf Stream and going to the Bahamas, what you need to know, when and how to do it. And we'll be talking about a few trips about Bahamas cruising, because I'm going to assume that for most of you, that is the destination. Anyhow, everyone, thank you very much for joining me tonight. If you have any questions, we just had somebody enter. If you have any questions, give me a shout, please. You can catch me on Facebook on Messenger, or send a question to me on Facebook. For the couple who just entered, Mara and Fred, you have just come in at the end of the webinar, but the webinar will be available online. It's been recorded, and I'll have a link on Facebook a little bit later on this evening.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you for joining me tonight. We'll see you next Wednesday for the Bahamas tour. Good night, all.
Yeah.